Welcome to my channel, everybody. This is Fly Little Birds and my name is Nairi, and today I want to talk about the different ages for adoption and sort of some of the pros and cons of those different ages, for want of a better word. So we have two adopted sons who are now teenagers, and when we first met them they were foster children. We fostered them for many years and then we adopted them. So we've gone through all the ages with them. And we've also fostered different ages. I also have 5 birth children. So, and enough waffling, and let's get into the subject. I'm going to start, I think, with teenage. So when I say teenage, I'm going to say 12 and above, and then we'll section off the ages as we go down through. So you can skip the video if you're not interested in the older ages. So let's talk about teenagers. So some of the positives about adopting a teenager are, first of all, their chances of getting adopted are very, very slim. So if you do put yourself forward for a teenager, you are probably going to be the only one for that teenager and the only chance of them getting that permanency that adoption offers. The other thing is if you do strike a really good bond with a teenager, then that respect for you and that relationship is going to be pretty magical. If they really do understand and appreciate what you've done for them, giving them a home to feel secure and settled in, then you're going to be part of them growing into adulthood, and then all the benefits that come from having that relationship with an adult child is going to be amazing. And I always say, really, with adoption, the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. So it might be really tough and difficult, but it could be very rewarding, because at the end of the day, a teenager can tell you how they feel, describe their feelings to you, and they can give you some ways of appreciation back in a way that a younger child can't verbalise. The more difficult side of it would be that they're often set in their ways, and a lot of things that have happened to them, many years possible of placement changes, or even if they haven't had that and they've had to move away from a birth family, that would be very traumatic, because they're going to have a lot of knowledge and history with that birth family. So you don't have as much time to build up history and memories with them. I think that it's much more difficult to nurture a teenager because they're growing into independence, and that's what teenagers do. I mean, my sons are like testing the boundaries, and we're trying to give them independent skills ready for adulthood, and that's what you want. And so you don't have such a nurturing role. It's a different type of parenting with a teenager. So you're coming in at a very, very different stage when they've already gone through the majority of their childhood. And it has to be said, teenagers can be difficult. I don't want to label them as that, but they're very much testing out. They can swing back into childhood, they can swing forward into trying to be mini adults. You might get more aggression, you may get more verbal sort of disturbances from them, and trying to control a teenager when they're being very physical with you or very demanding is more difficult. However, of course, if you're an older parent, this could really suit you. So I wouldn't rule it out, because, as I say, greater the risk, greater the reward. So we're going to come down on the next age group now, 8 to 11, 7 to 11, 8 to 11. Go for that. So this age group, I think, is actually possibly more difficult than teenage, actually, because at this point the children are becoming to understand maybe a little bit more what's happened to them. They may have a better understanding of the neglect or maltreatment that they've suffered, because they're having a bigger awareness. They are trying to negotiate friendships a lot more at school, and peers are having more of an influence on them. So whereas before a lot of things happen in the home, they are probably just starting to get a little bit more independent and to go out and about. Things at school are kind of ramping up, and things that they're getting tested on school are getting more difficult. The academic side is getting more difficult, friendships getting more difficult, and they're going to maybe test out really whether they're going to listen to you and whether they want to listen to you. And so things are rapidly changing, and they're just about approaching puberty as well toward the end of that age group, so it can be pretty tricky. I think sometimes, although we think of teenagers being more difficult, there's a chance that this age group is more difficult. But the positive side of this, again, is that the chances of a child being adopted between 8 and 11 is very, very narrow, very slim. And they still have childhood elements to them at this point that you can work with, and you still got longer to make memories than you have with a teenager, so you've got more chance to take them out to trips and things that they would still enjoy, whereas teenagers kind of put their foot down and say, I don't want to do that anymore, like I'm too grown up for that. You can still do quite a lot with an 8 to 11-year-old. Still got the problems of potential aggression being more difficult to handle. if they have outbursts and meltdowns because the child is getting bigger more physically. Let's go for the 4 to 7 age group. Now, sometimes what happens is when adoption happens, if siblings happen together, then you might get one between the age of 4 and 7 and one much younger child. So if you're thinking about that, you might be happy to go for siblings, then you may well end up with a child that age as well as a younger child. 4 to 7s are interesting. They have a lot of transitions because they're going to be starting school around that time, so they've got an adjustment around that time, but they're still very much open to influence from you. They're still happy to listen to what an adult has to say to them, and they haven't quite got into the situation where peers are everything and everything a peer says, now go. So you have more options to nurture, train, parent than you do for an older child. Still really difficult for children to be adopted at this age, believe it or not. So actually you are offering a child a home that would potentially find it very difficult to be placed. So that's a real plus, a real positive. And you still have loads of opportunity to nurture them and to make memories with them. So it's a really good age group to consider, particularly if you're going to be an older parent and you don't want to go through those heavy developmental stages that you go through with a much younger child. And I want to say as well, for teenage, for 8 to 11 and for this age group, many of the developmental issues that might appear will probably have appeared by now. So when you're adopting these age groups, you know probably what you're taking on. Not everything, you won't know everything, because sometimes things don't even come out until children are adults, but you're going to have a much better idea from 4 right up to teenage if there's developmental issues. So from the perspective of what you're taking on more, you can see what the problem is going to be. You're better equipped to deal with them because you know what you're taking on. So let's go down a little bit. Shall we go down? Let's go for 2 to 4. What I would describe as kind of toddler, early years age group. This is a really common age to adopt because in our country, especially in the UK, the opportunity for babies isn't as great. People don't give up babies as much, and the competition for babies is really great. Then this age group, 2 to 4, is such a common age to adopt. Now, the positives on this are they're still developing at really high rates, so you can assist and help them, you can nurture them. You're still going to get lots of cuddles at this stages, and so you can get that more intimate sort of closeness with this age younger child, and you can make many memories and have lots and lots of fun with this age. Like, they're happy, receptive for lots of different types of gifts and trips and lovely new experiences. The negative side of it is the separation anxiety. So if they've got established within a birth family or within a foster family, then pulling them away from that into adoptive family does have a high impact on them, even if they don't show it, because they have an awareness, a bigger awareness than a baby would have of actually what's happening. But they may not have the language to describe to you how they're feeling about it, which is a negative compared to older children who can tell you, if they want to, how they're feeling about things. So a 2 to 4 year old being a toddler may not have the language development to describe. They may not be displaying some of the things that are perhaps going to develop with their development later on. So if they've got any childhood conditions, they've got any things that are kind of wrong, you may not be able to see it at this point. So you may be adopting slightly blindly and just not know what's going to come out of the woodwork. And we had a bit of an idea with our boys that what was wrong, but things definitely came out later. And although a lot of it was there in the early days, things developed more. We could see much more clearly what was happening with them as they got into the later years that I've already described to you. Toddlers are very willful. Early years children are very willful. They don't understand why you're saying no to them sometimes, and so they're very hectic, very physical. You'd be doing a lot of running around. And one other negative would be, which sometimes people don't consider, is that you're going to have to spend a lot of time at home. And if you have a really good career, a job that you want to go back to, or financially you're going to need to go back to your job, then you may have the early years facilities near, preschools, nurseries that you can put them in. But in reality, you are still going to be spending quite a lot of time at home with a 2 to 4 year old, which is great for them with attachment. You're going to build attachment really, really well, but it's less flexible for you. So if you know that actually you're going to need to go out to work fairly quickly, or you want to, then having a child that's still not of school age is probably not going to be for you. And now we go down to what people normally think of adoption as the 0 to 2 year olds, which I'm going to refer to as babies. So the positives are pretty obvious in the sense that you can build a really strong attachment with a baby, because you're going to spend a lot of time being close to them, talking to them, making eye contact, playing with them, holding them, the things that you do with babies, feeding them, and that allows you to build an attachment pretty quickly. And if you haven't been able to have your own children, or you particularly like babies, then that closeness and nurturing is almost what people think of when they're having a child, and it kind of mirrors, if you like, having your own child, because you have all those stages that you can go through with a child. You can grow with them, you can understand with them, you can see all the different stages as they start talking, walking, and all the fun things that happen with babies. And if you can put yourself forward for a baby because you've not been able to have your own, or you particularly like babies, then it's worth fighting for that if that's what you're really thinking of in terms of adoption. So the negatives are, it's very competitive. In your country, you might even have to put yourself forward as a potential adopter. In our country, it's just that there aren't that many babies, and so it's very competitive. Also, as I said before, you can't necessarily see what developmental issues that baby is going to have. You'll often find in the profiles they say things like may have this, or this could happen, or it looks like this, because they're not sure at this point whether that child is going to develop fetal alcohol syndrome, whether they're going to develop a language delay, if they're not looking like they're walking at the right time that they should be walking. How serious is that? So those are the things to be looking at, as what's hidden in the profile. What's the potential for this child? We've had a lot of things come out with our children, but we knew, but they're quite difficult to deal with, even when you know. So if you don't know and you adopt and the child develops something you weren't expecting, it's really hard to live with. So there's that to take into consideration. The other thing, of course, is it's very time consuming with a baby and very physically tiring. So even if you're willing to be at home, you will get really tired. And I know some adopters that have had very little experience of babies, and then they've gone for a child, say 1 to 2 years old, and the shock to the system of suddenly having sleepless nights, trying to work out feeding and weaning and things like this, and accustoming themselves to a really young child being in the home, the safety issues that come with actually 0 to 4 years old, where you have to think of stair gates, you have to think of ovens, you have to think of what your garden's like, whether it's safe. Safety issues that with an older child you don't need to worry about as much. It's a complete change of lifestyle, and any adoption will mean you have to make sacrifices because you have a new child in the home. So your social life will be different, and your friends and family, some will drop off the wayside because they're not as supportive as you thought they would be. But also if you have a baby, more so, because you are going to be stuck at home in the evenings more. Yes, there might be 2 of you, but you might not want the other one out gallivanting. So I think any child 0 to 4, you've got to think about your social life will be much more restricted, whereas the older the child, the more independent the child, especially if you don't have any major behavioural issues, then actually you've got more flexibility. So let's just talk about behavioural issues while we're on the subject. So our boys both have them, really, the younger boy especially, but it's to suffice to say that you have to understand with any adoption that the childhood trauma has happened. Now this is also for babies, okay? Because a lot of people think, oh, if I take a baby on, I won't have as many problems. And that might be the case, but I think you have to understand for any of the age, they've gone through childhood trauma, whether that's been from being removed from a birth family, but it was fine in the birth family, but there was other reasons why they were removed, or they've moved from foster care, or they've been severely neglected, maltreated. There is going to be childhood trauma. And so at any point in the adoption process, at any point through the adoption, you can expect to maybe see that coming out in some way. Some children will be withdrawn, some children will be out there and have meltdowns and behaviour issues. And you have to really anticipate that whatever age of child and however it looks when you take the child on, however quiet they may be, there may still be a chance that that childhood trauma is going to come out in some way. And that's the extra dimension to parenting any child that is adopted or even fostered. So I hope that helps you. I have a couple of people that have suggested videos that they want to see in January, so it might be January, February. If you have a particular video in mind that you'd like to see on a particular subject, either adoption or fostering, childhood trauma, or just parenting, then go to my channel page, look on my community tab and drop in your idea for a video, and I'll try to do them in order. As long as it's not too outrageous, I'll give it a go. Happy New Year again, and I'll see you on Fly Little Birds. Thank you.